After dealing with cars and trains in the previous episodes, let's now focus on something completely different, and that is education. We will build a brand new university campus and talk about some related backgrounds, so we will briefly touch the topic of education in the Eastern Bloc. Welcome everyone to Altengrad city in city Skylines. This project will take us to the edge of the city, to a place we haven't seen in a really long time. It is the tram loop area with some of the 1920s, 30s modern residential buildings. It's overall a perfect spot for this new project, nice open space and presence of public transportation. So let's briefly talk about education, while in the background I will be choosing and placing the university buildings and doing some initial details. The overall system of education in the Central European countries of the Eastern Bloc wasn't that different from today, so no point explaining in detail all the levels, different schools, exams and so on. But there were some key differences related, of course, to the ruling regimes and their policies. So let's focus on that. There were already many universities established all around the region, some being even hundreds of years old. But new universities were created as well. This included various technical, agricultural, military, or political and economic schools, basically intended to prepare new generations of politicians, leaders, company managers, and so on, with high focus on the communist style of running things, central planning, and so on. Even some special academic titles were created for graduates from these schools. All schools were public, there were no private schools, so all schools were controlled by the government through the ministries of education or some equivalent, which is the same today for public schools, but the level of control was higher back then. Universities, for example, couldn't choose their own representatives through the academic senates or similar bodies. They couldn't completely freely choose what to teach and how to expand. Although some universities in some countries during some political situations had more freedoms. It all depended on the current political climate, which wasn't the same throughout the entire communist decades. Overall, the regimes had a tough relationship with universities. On one hand, higher education is vital to the country's functioning, regardless of the regime. It needs doctors, engineers, scientists, and so on. But universities were also places where critique and opposition to the regimes were common. So who was allowed to study or teach at a university was tightly controlled. After finishing high school, anyone could have applied to a university, but the process was quite complicated. Students' grades in high school were not that important. Much more important were evaluations by various committees that looked at the students' activities, whether or not they were somehow politically active one way or the other, if they were troublemakers, just generally or politically especially, and what was their family background. If the students' parents were workers without any higher education, it was automatically a big plus. But if their parents already had university education, it did not help the student and could have even disqualified them right away. If the parents or even the kids were in the Communist Party or some youth communist organization, that was a huge plus. And of course, if the parents had some higher connections or did some little favors or just flat out bribed the people in charge of the evaluation, that helped a lot as well. This was especially strict for the humanities fields, journalism, management, political studies, and for studying to become a teacher. A little less so for technical fields. Students and teachers were then carefully observed during their studies. The strictness and some level of possible consequences of breaking the written and unwritten rules again depended on the current political climates. After finishing school, especially in the technical fields, the graduates were not entirely free to choose where to work. They would receive a work order to be employed at a company even on the other side of the country, far from their homes. But again, certain personal connections and favors could have prevented that. So overall, the state controlled the number of students in various fields and where would they go after finishing their studies. Technical education was prioritized. This can be illustrated by the new university buildings and whole campuses of the technical faculties that can be found all over the region, pretty much in every larger city. New faculties were created as well, for example, for agricultural sciences or nuclear engineering. The post-war period is also the time when we see the modern campuses, so places with the actual school, usually with several faculties and multiple buildings, as well as some university amenities, dorms, labs, and so on. The existing universities until these times were in various buildings around the city, either built for the university directly or repurposed from something older. Some universities still use those buildings in city centers and just expanded different parts of the faculties into the new campuses. From the architectural side, the new university buildings, especially in the 1960s, were very modern, following the current trends, and architects could have built something really interesting with these projects, include various art and so on. Although we can also see some university buildings that are just mundane office-like blocks, and especially in later decades. Anyway, that's that. Let's now talk about the university built here in Altengrad. Okay, so this project started by creating that palette of buildings that I could just place. I really just wanted to see what kind of structures are going to look in the game compared to the other buildings, and how big are they, and basically just like try some preliminary combinations of different buildings. So I eventually decided that I'm going to use as large buildings as possible, and I'm just going to be combining some buildings together as well, so that we are really going to create this like a highly modern and massive university campus on the edges of the city. So this place, I already knew that I would like to build a university in this area, so that's the reason why I intentionally did not really build past that tram loop, because the tram loop was supposed to be some kind of like a main, entrance area basically for the entire campus. It really makes sense with the trams, and just visually it also creates like an interesting place, really, just some kind of a circle. It's not really like a roundabout or anything, it's just circular because of the loop, but it just creates that open space that's not exactly all that busy with traffic anymore. It's past that main street. So yeah, it's just like a original plan to build some kind of university campus over here. Although I wanted to build it slightly differently. At first I was thinking I'm just going to do the layout of the streets differently and things like that, and that's exactly why it's very important to just test fit certain buildings, because these kinds of original plans are always going to just completely fall apart when you start placing those first buildings. Right, so that was the case over here. So I used that like a brown or orange building first. It's absolutely massive, and it was perfect for this area, and it's absolutely perfect architecturally for this project. Now, since I don't really have all of the buildings for the campus with the same style, I am going to be doing some kind of combinations of different styles. Although the buildings do follow like some overall general style that is kind of fitting for the time period. So we can probably think of this university campus as not built in like one go in one project, not built by or designed by one architect, but it was just like a campus that was just built over a couple of years, maybe even a couple of decades, with, like I said, different architects, different competitions, architectural, maybe even maybe like different faculties as well in these different buildings, of course. So I'm just building the entire campus like fully today, even though we might do some expansions of it in like very modern times, but I guess that this is going to be something I will do even with some other projects in the city. I really don't want to do these more disconnected projects in separate, videos, separate projects in the city, because it would just be a little bit too weird, right? We wouldn't really build all that much. So I'm just going to do this campus fully, even though it probably would have been built more realistically over, several years, maybe even decades, right? So this campus would probably be finished in the 1970s, especially some of these more modern structures. But like I said, I just want to complete it and, be done with it, because it's really not that large of a project anyway. So that's just a little inaccuracy that probably should have been mentioned. Right, so also with this project, I'm doing a slightly different approach, and that is detailing already when I don't have all the buildings placed, right? That's kind of like a approach that's much better, actually, if you think about it, because when you are going to place the first couple of buildings, you already have some idea how you need to detail things around. And, why not do that already? Because if you already have the thing in mind, then why not just put it into the game. Why wait? Yeah, before you finish all the rest of the buildings in some kind of like an order. Yeah, so this is actually so much faster, even though it might be a little bit different than I'm kind of used to, but it was very, very beneficial to try this different approach. So that's exactly the reason why I'm already bothering with all of these decal surfaces. So for example, by the way, yeah, these are the same decals that I'm using everywhere else in the city for these new projects. And when I was, for example, building these first in that what was that, the mall area in front of that new bridge, then I waited with these until the last thing. Yeah, so that was the old approach, let's say. But in this place, I'm using them right away and even creating these outlines with these curves and doing just some already final details. So that's actually going so much faster, and you can even tell, maybe even the time lapse, that the time lapse is not really that much cut, yeah, because I'm just building, yeah, I'm just whatever I want to do at that point, I'm just going to immediately build it without thinking too much about the progression of the build, yeah. So we did those buildings, we did the details, and now we are going to move into a different place and do the different buildings, okay? So yeah, that's just a little bit different, and I will try to do it this way even going forward. Right, so those were the main buildings for the university there on that like an avenue street, so that it would be just visible. Yeah, the buildings would be visible, and the overall campus is just closed off with that taller building towards the end of that street, yeah, which is just visually creating like a really interesting shape, especially for the perspective of the viewer from the street. Yeah, if you just got off the trams, then you just see all these buildings very clearly, and at the end of the street there is that tallest building. So visually it works really well. Now in this second part, oh yeah, by the way, behind those whiter buildings, I created these industrial buildings like warehouses or something. But I'm thinking those are some kind of like labs. Yeah, if it was some kind of engineering faculty, then it would have some sort of labs with all kinds of equipment, not just for studies, but even doing some science or testing and experiments and these kinds of things. Yeah. So it's not just the fancy university buildings, but also these kinds of structures as well. It's just filling the volume as well, creating that place much larger. Now, we are going to build some dorms as well. This is actually something that I was taking some inspiration from real life with various universities. There are a couple of universities around the region where the dorms are not part of the campus. They are actually far away in different parts of the city, and there are many different dorms as well in different universities. But with this particular university, we're just going to do it in one go in a single campus. Now, the dorm buildings, again, depends on the kind of university. From real life, of course, there are examples of structures where the dorms are really fancy, but there are also examples where the dorms are, just normal, ordinary looking buildings. And since we are in the 1960s, kind of 70s, like I explained with the university project, then we have to do the dorms with the prefabs if we want to have them slightly more ordinary. So this is a good opportunity to finally take a look at some of these prefabs made by the concrete prefabricated buildings made by Meister Monis. These are not the residential buildings, I believe. All of these are actual schools, in real life, I guess, and they perfectly fit this particular purpose. So, like I said, I was inspired by some real life dormitories from Ostrava, I believe. Yeah, from Poruba. Yeah, that university there. And the dorms were also just built so that it's basically like a single building. If you want to go from one part of the structure to another, you don't need to even leave the building and be exposed to the outside. So I was trying to do something similar like that. The dorms are oriented so that it resembles maybe some kind of barracks, let's say, but it's just all connected with some lower structures like that. What's really great about these Meister Monis' buildings is that you can actually change skins of them, and they are going to change they are going to change the decorative murals or like mosaics on the front facades. So on that building towards the front of that dorm area, there is like a nice little mosaic, some kind of a sculpture, even like something like that. And on the rest of them, there is just some abstract art, which is looking really, really good. Also, I changed colors slightly of that large building on the end of the campus, as you could have seen there, because by default it was a little bit yellow, so I had to neutralize it, make it look similar. Now, these buildings, by the way, where I'm putting the pedestrian paths through them, those are actually from Finland in real life. These are the Sampola High School buildings or something like that. And they come with these different parts of the buildings from the workshop, so you can just nicely change them and change the shapes, create something unique, just like I did over here. So yeah, overall, I'm actually quite surprised that this project was not that difficult with the amount of buildings, with choosing the buildings, and even using the actual in-game buildings I was able to, or in-game schools I was able to do the university. I did not really have to get all that super creative with these buildings. So that's actually nice. I was really afraid that this is going to be a super difficult project, that the building selection is just not going to be that great, and I will have to use maybe even some residential or something, offices maybe, but I don't even have those, that many of those, so, it would have been really painful. But yeah, this turned out looking, actually great, kind of how I imagined it. All right, so now we are just going to do some of those last details. Obviously, the area needs to be just crisscrossed with all the pedestrian streets, all the access points into the various buildings, because I, changed the orientation of those buildings quite a lot. I had to, for example, touch the entrances, positions of the entrances with the Bob mod, because the entrance is technically like a prop that asset creators put there in the asset editor, or whatever it's called, building editor. So we can actually change that, and people will, use those streets how they are supposed to. So that's, kind of nice. And all those open spaces that we did, we have them with lots of people. I suppose that right now this building or this entire campus is not exactly all that nice gameplay-wise, because it provides a lot of high school positions, because these buildings are mostly high schools. So there are lots of people going here. You will probably see that in the cinematics, that tram stop, you can already see it here, is super busy, and lots of people are going into these prefab buildings. So on one hand, that's actually nice that we are doing some kind of project on the edge of the city that's immediately very busy. For example, the train station from last time was not really. So, that's a nice change, although this might be a little too much, yeah? So, as you can see over here, maybe I already turned off some of the buildings. Just simply turn them off, there are schools, I can do that. And some of these other buildings, for example, in that dormitory area, I just changed them with Rico into commercial buildings, yeah? Because we do need some commercial areas in here around, anyway, because there would be some kind of like cafeterias or something. So gameplay wise, we can just make them into commercial buildings. It's also going to put some kind of cargo traffic into the area, which, looks nice. And it's just going to make more sense gameplay wise, I suppose, because there are really lots of these different buildings as schools, and they have so many like gameplay positions for the students. So that would be otherwise kind of broken. And, everyone from the rest of the city would be going here, making the traffic quite crazy. Now, as you can see, I also changed the map theme for this particular area, which I'm not exactly all that happy with, because that tram loop obviously would not change. There is no reason to get rid of the cobblestone from it. So, but yeah, unfortunately, we just have to do that if we want to have the modern surfaces in here. And these places are just too close, and I'm not going to be able to just, switch between the themes for different views, different angles. So yeah, that's just the limitation of City Skylines themes. We cannot have two of them simultaneously, so yeah, I suppose that realistically I would really like to have cobblestone there still on those old streets that already existed, and only the new surfaces over here. But we can only have one or the other, and I suppose that the modern surfaces are so much more realistic in these new places. So, there is that. I'm also paying attention to place all the street lights. These days we have the distribution function in intersection marking tools, so that's actually making it a lot easier. Although in here I, for example, should have used that function to put the markings between the intersections when doing the street lights. That would have been even faster. There's also that little residential area there on the top because I just really wanted to fill the place with something a little bit more. I also downloaded new houses, so I just wanted to test them, but I did not really focus on that place too much. It's just, it's just there. We already had some streets there prepared, those mud roads that were kind of indicating that there's going to be something. So I just expanded it with these low density, blocks. It's nothing all that crazy. It's just a couple of houses anyway, because those were kind of built in these time periods as well as the large high density buildings. So I'm probably going to be actually I am planning on doing like an episode where I'm going to just kind of wrap up the 60s. Don't worry, it's not going to be the next episode, all right? Sometime in the future. I'm going to wrap up the 60s by basically building some smaller projects all around the city. And together with that, we're probably going to revisit the low density situation, because I really did make a mistake in the 30s by not doing the low density areas that much around the city. So if you take a look at, for example, Budapest, in real life there are huge low density kind of suburbs around the city already pre-war. So, Altengrad is exact opposite, and it's just not looking all that super realistic. But again, the thing that I don't want to build low density areas because they are just so boring still applies. So I'm probably not gonna go that crazy with that. Anyway, also the trees, as you can see, the trees are tiny because the area is new. I did some sports, grounds over here. Did not really want to bother with it, so they are just, straight out of the box from the workshop, some tennis grounds as well, and a couple of those like paved open spaces that are also found in real life. This is that mural, or not mural, but like mosaic on the front facade of these buildings. Is looking really, really good. So good job, Meister Monis, good job. And we are going to end the cinematic session with the overall view of the entire city. It's really huge, isn't it? Doing these kinds of shots makes me really appreciate how, there's a lot of work already done in the city, and it's going to be even bigger when we are done with the 20th century sometime in the future. Anyway, that is going to be all for today's Altengrad episode. I hope you liked it. If you did, then please don't forget to do all those things for the algorithm below the video, so all the clicking, writing and things. And you can also become channel member if you want to directly support this channel, what I do here. Big thanks to all the channel supporters that we already have. I really appreciate it. It's really nice of you guys. Thank you again. Goodbye.